Some really tough players.
6 of the players bought in for $100,000. Patrick Antonius, he decided to cover the table. He's in for $400,000. We've got an even $1 million at this table. Phil Ivey, first to act with the 5-4. He's not going to play it. But just to remind our viewers, the blinds are $300, $600 with a running ante of $100.
Raise. 2,100.
And Patrick Antonius is going to raise this up to 2,100. Button is on Alan Cunningham. Small blinds, Tom Dwan. Big blind is Mike Mattisau, but that's the ace-king offsuit of Chris Jesus Ferguson.
This mine?
Now he's faced a raise from Patrick Antonius. Is this a re-raise spot?
I think it probably is, even though it's the first hand.
Oh, we're not either. Has it been there?
6,000 and a half.
Well, he's made the re-raise. Now back to Patrick. He's up against Chris, who doesn't play as many cash games as Patrick, but he's giving him some respect nice and early. Chris is going to win the first hand.
Yeah, nice re-raise there from Chris Ferguson. He's going to take the first pot and strike first blood.
Take advantage of
I tried to steal it.
Take advantage of
Just
me.
like that.
Buttons in front of Tom Dwan. Small blind, Mike the Mouth Mattisau. Big blind is Phil Ivey. Patrick Antonius will be first to act. He's under the gun.
Would you like to bet on that?
Dealer asking for the $100 ante. Now we're going to be playing for 24 hours straight. If you're a poker player, how do you gear up for such a long session?
Make sure you get a good night's sleep and prepare for the coffee for the rest of the day.
I pass.
Well, Antonius is going to pass.
I think most poker players are used to doing long sessions. Sitting at the table for a good 12, 14 hours is nothing unusual. And the occasional cash game can go on for like 24, 36 hours. So I don't think most of these players are a stranger for that kind of length of session.
Well, Chris Ferguson definitely not a stranger at putting chips in the pot. He's going to raise it up with ace-7, but he's walked into the 9s of Alan Cunningham.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see how Alan wants to play this.
Raise. 6,000 to go.
It makes it 6,000 to play. Putting the pressure back on Chris.
Now Chris Ferguson out of position with the ace-7 offsuit. Well, the only play he really had, huh?
Yeah, pretty well. I think that was always going to be Alan's as soon as he decided to re-raise. So 2 hands, 2 re-raises, and both of them have picked up the pot.
Phil Ivey with over 12 million in tournament winnings. Alan Cunningham with over 10 million.
Nope, that was a flash card, I think, right? Let me turn that back in.
Turn it back in.
Oh, has it happened before?
Action on Andrew Feldman.
Not for very long with that hand, I don't think. He gets out of the way.
Jackson 5 in the muck. Ferguson getting out of the way. Over to Cunningham. Seat number 7.
Raise 2,000.
And he makes it 2,000. Well, and he's picked up the Cowboys. Now, is that a pretty standard raise? The blinds are 300, 600 to the $100 ante.
Slightly more than you'd probably expect. 3 times the big blind is a more standard kind of raise. But it's pretty early in the day, and perhaps he doesn't want to get too creative with his 2 kings. But he's happy to pick up a small pot rather than lose a big one. And he does.
Stuck 100,000 each.
Ivey throws away the ace-9, showing respect to Cunningham. Cunningham, he gets a lot of respect from his peers, doesn't he?
Well, I'm not surprised. He's a very, very strong player, but he's also relatively tight, especially this kind of early. We've already seen him do very well in previous series of the $1 Million Cash Game.
Welcome to the FullTiltPoker.net $1 Million Cash Game. Buttons in front of Patrick Antonius. Small blind, Andrew Feldman. Big blind, Chris Ferguson. Alan Cunningham will be first to act.
600 to go.
Just whenever it's ready.
Pass.
Here's Tom Dwan.
Yep, that's Durr. Well, he's got the snowmen.
2 8s for Tom.
And he's going to raise it up to 2,100.
Cool.
Phil Ivey in there with a 10-7 of hearts.
Yeah, kind of the gap-suited connector. Now he's got position on Tom Dwan. And that's going to bring in Patrick Antonius as well on the button with the suited ace. And this pot is quickly ballooning up to nearly $10,000.
Call.
Well, Andrew Feldman's in there as well.
2,000.
I thought maybe we'd see a squeeze play there from Andrew Feldman. But against these players, he thinks twice.
Chris in there as well. Wow, it's not a lot of respect for Tom's raise there.
5 players.
Well, I think by the time it got to Chris Ferguson, he figured, well, I'm
9,
priced
6,
in. 9, 6, 6, a couple of diamonds out there. And it's not a bad flop for Tom Dwan, but Chris Ferguson has outflopped him. Phil Ivey's flopped the gut shot, but if he hits his gut shot, Tom Dwan makes a full house.
Well, he's reaching for some chips, looking like a continuation bet. He's got a lot of players to get through with this bet, but if he's not going to bet this kind of a flop with his 2 8s, what does he need?
7,200.
Don't think Phil's likely to call this. He's got players behind him, only got a gut shot.
You know, sometimes in position, Phil Ivey might be floating here, but with so many of the players behind, he's really got nothing. He's got 2 hearts in his hand, but you know, Phil Ivey, one of the best in the world.
What do we know? If he decides to put the chips in, it's probably the right play.
Oh, probably the right play for him. And it's a $7,200 bet from Tom Dwan, actually on Phil Ivey.
Looks like he's staring at some more chips. Just eyeing up the other 3 players behind him.
Now you look at a flop like this, 2 diamonds out there, possible straight draws as well, paired board. Is this the kind of board you might be making a move on?
Well, he's decided to lay it down. I think if he hasn't got the 3 players behind him, he might call with position, float a card, and see what Tom decides to do on the turn. But as it happens, he's got out of the way. It's going to be a tough decision for Chris. If Phil had called, he might have laid this hand down, but I don't think he's going to now.
Yeah, well, with everybody else folding, now Ferguson only has to worry about Tom Dwan. He's flopped top pair with a queen kicker.
But he's out of position. This is Chris, who's probably maybe the least experienced in a cash game environment out of these players.
Obviously such a great tournament player.
Exactly, so he still knows the pretty well value of hands, and he's decided to make the call.
On turn. 10 of clubs.
Turn is a 10 of clubs.
Gives a good shot
10.
straight draw for Tom Dwan. Would have hit Phil Ivey if he had decided to float one.
Check.
Now the board is somewhat draw heavy. Does Tom Dwan think he's ahead here? Does he think maybe Chris Ferguson's on a draw?
Well,
Check.
Well, he's gonna check it. We're gonna see a river.
10.
I think he's happy to take the free card. That's pretty well brought. A lot of cards, a lot of hands completing with that 10. Would have been particularly good for Phil Ivey if it had stayed in.
If somebody was in there with diamonds or somebody was in there with 7-8, that 10 of diamonds completed both draws.
Check.
And Ferguson going to check this down.
So
Dwan
Tom
checks as well.
2 pairs.
And Ferguson's going to win this with a better 2 pair. He's got 10s and 9s. Tom Dwan with 10s and 8s. And Chris Ferguson wins a nice pot there. $26,000 headed to Chris Ferguson.
Yeah, I think there was maybe an opportunity for Tom to bet the turn. I think it was a good pressure bet he could have made. Of course, he's worried that maybe that's completed Chris's hand, or Chris is sitting there with a 6, and he may be happy to take the free card to maybe bust a 6 by catching the 7 or 8. I'm not surprised he checked it, but possibly an opportunity missed.
First act is Mike the Mouth Mattisau.
6 to call.
Now, Gary, you have a lot of experience with a lot of these players. One player in particular I was wondering about, Andrew Feldman.
Well, he's actually one of the few at the table I haven't played with much. I've watched him play before. He's one of those players that's really come to a head very, very quickly over a short period of time.
Pass.
Definitely what you call the new generation of online superstars.
Pass.
Made an awful lot of money very, very quickly playing, well, this game, No Limit Hold'em online.
2,000 to call.
Well, it's $2,000 over to Tom Dwan. And he's going to call this.
2 players.
Defending his blind.
Yeah, Dwan versus Ivy. Neither player with much of anything here.
King,
Ivy
check.
with the queen 8.
Check.
Tom Dwan with 6-4. Dwan has outflopped him, though, with a pair of 6s. He's got
3,000.
bottom pair, but how does he know he's ahead? He's out of position.
Well, it's a bet from Phil. It's a pretty scary board. It does look like it's likely to hit a razor, but that doesn't stop Tom. He wants to see what the turn card is, hoping possibly to catch 2 pair to crack a decent hand.
King.
Well, the king
Check.
pairs on the turn. Is that more likely to think, now if you're Tom Dwan, are you more likely to think your pair of 6s is good here? He's got 2 pair now, kings and 6s.
Of course. Well, it's a check from Phil.
7.
He's got plenty of cards he could have gone in front with. That 7's not one of them.
Check. Check.
That was 6.
6.
And Phil Ivey shuts down after his flop bet. Tried one continuation bet, it didn't work for him. He shuts down. Tom Dwan's going to win this pot. And it's $11,000 headed Tom Dwan's way. The FullTiltPoker.net $1 million cash game. $1 million on the table. Blinds are $300, $600 of the 100 running ante.
6 to call.
Beautiful venue
Talk to myself.
in the heart of London.
It's more fun now. You laugh at it more.
I understand.
And not a beautiful hand for Phil Ivey. That's not going to stop him. Most mere mortals would throw 10-4 in the muck. But Phil Ivey looks like he's going to play this one. And I'm pretty sure, did Ivy limp in there?
Yeah, Ivy limped.
27. Sorry.
It's a raise
700.
from Patrick Antonius to 2,700.
It's an odd limp there. Not a short-handed game, but 7-handed. To limp in an early position with 10-4 suited.
I think he's just trying to mix it up a little. Wants to play a couple of hands early on.
27 to call.
Possibly feels like he's not in the game at the moment.
Pass.
Well, one thing that's interesting, every single year we see the $1 million cash game, we see Phil Ivey, we see him mix it up. And sometimes he's down a couple $100,000, but at the end of the day,
27
he always seems like he's the big winner.
Too early to drink, huh?
He has had some of the biggest pots in televised poker. Was it over 800,000 we saw in one of the previous series he managed to win?
And it was between
Against-
these two guys, actually, Patrick Antonius and Phil Ivey.
Well, here he goes catching a bit of a hand here.
Well, it's an interesting flop. We had the flush draw for Patrick Antonius and an open-ended straight draw for Ivey. King high is the best hand right now.
$5,100.
And Antonius is going to bet 5,100.
Cool.
And Phil Ivey is going to call.
4.
Well, Phil's gone in front right now, but it's still a pretty scary looking card.
Check.
It's a very scary board there. I mean, you got 3, 4, 5, 6. You got a one-liner to a straight. But Patrick Antonius raised pre-flop. Would you put your opponent on a 7 or a deuce here?
Check.
Well, it goes check, check. Here comes the river.
Queen.
And the river's the queen of diamonds. Misses both players.
Check.
Okay.
Check.
And both players check the river.
Shut down. Flip.
Phil's going to take this one down. Managed to get a little bit lucky by catching the 4.
Nice hand. Thank you.
And Patrick Antonius probably wondering, if I bet one more time, do I win this pot?
Well, we'll never know, and Phil's going to be counting the chips.
Good hand, no? Had a good hand.
Phil Ivey, second on an all-time money list. Adds $18,000 to his stack.
Tell them why you are who you are.
The hand plays itself.
It did.
Hi, I'm Phil Ivey, 7-time WSOP bracelet winner. When I first started playing, I played, 16 hours a day, every day for the first 4 or 5 years. So I really just kind of gave up my life to poker. I didn't really have a mentor. I spoke with people that I played with, got their opinions on certain hands that would come up and things like that. I really respected Chip Reese, one of the best players ever, if not the best. And I just enjoyed playing with him. I enjoyed his company, and just a wonderful person. They're all pretty good people at the table, so but we're all trying to take each other's money. There's no doubt about that.
I just never won a hand. I ended up losing that day. Why? How much did you win in flips? 500 or 400? 400.
How much did I win in flips that day, Pat?
6 you could.
Well, some things that never change. Our big winner so far is Phil Ivey. He's up $18,000.
Flipper than, you know, like real good at poker. Anyway.
Tom Dwan down a few thousand already. Patrick Antonius is the most money at the table, but he bought in for 400.
1,100.
Than poker.
Pass.
Poker's, you know, hard work. I like, you know, those luck games. You just run good in them.
Ivey with the worst hand in poker. Well, it's almost like a handicap that he should have. The best player in the world with the worst hand in poker. And he raises it up.
Oh, I work harder than you do.
It's actually a re-raise of Tom Dwan's raise.
7,000.
Got stuck and then tilted your way into playing like 70 hours a day.
Tom Dwan originally raised it up to 2,100 with 7-5 of clubs. Phil Ivey doesn't give his opponent credit for anything. He's going to re-raise him with 7 deuce. Obviously not playing his cards, he's playing his opponent. On top of that, he has position.
You're all the same.
9 king jack.
Nothing for either player, so I'd expect a bet here from Phil.
Check.
King, jack, 9, couple of hearts out there. Dwan checks.
When you start firing with the 7 deuce, you know that you're probably going to have to keep bluffing because you're not likely to have a showdownable hand.
11,000.
Now it's a question of whether Tom wants to have a replay.
Phil Ivey bets 11,000 into about a 15,000 chip pot, and that's going to be enough to take it down.
I'm going to bluff Phil one big hand today to make up for what he did to me the last year.
And Phil Ivey showing us all why he is one of the best in the world.
Back normal.
Needed much of a...
Here we are at the FullTiltPoker.net $1 million cash game.
One enough.
I mean, I don't need many hands to start.
Tom Dwan first to act with the ace-4 offsuit.
Pass.
Well, he reached for some chips and changed his mind. Here comes the mouth, Mike Madisau with his 2 7s.
2,300.
I'll put it out there anyway.
And this is what's so dangerous about Phil Ivey. We see him make calls and re-raise with a 7 deuce, 8 6, 10 4. Now he's got a real hand. He's got the 9s. Impossible to know where you're at, though, when you're against Phil Ivey.
Exactly, he's just flat called this one. Possibly playing the player here, of course. Mike Madisau a little bit tighter than Tom Dwan in that starting hand selection. Queen, Queen 5. Looks like a good flop for the 2 7s of Mike.
Well, it's a great flop for both players there.
3,200. Cool.
Ivey calls him.
King.
Well, maybe another scary card if your opponent was in there with ace-king.
Check.
Well, they both checked it. Here comes the turn. River, rather.
Yeah, River's the deuce of diamonds. Well, talk about a safe card. Well, it does complete the flush draw there. 2 diamonds on the flop.
5,000.
Oh, and Ivey. I think he knows he's ahead. It's a great value bet. He's going to value town.
Mike's hoping he's got the 5. Or he's trying to represent the queen, which he hasn't got. Well, it's the 2 9s of Phil. And Mike plays his first pot, loses his first pot.
Always have me by 1. That's what they call it.
And Mike the mouth. At a loss for words there.
I stay out of your way, man. I'm gonna trap you and get all
You
your...
trap me and get it all. He's gonna trap me and get it all. You and Phil Hummeth have those.
See, I'm not like Phil.
He's gonna trap me and get it all on one hand.
Get it all.
Once again, I'm David Tuckman alongside Gary Jones. And 7 of the biggest names in poker have come together. Oh, Madisau likes the 7s. See if he likes the 4s as well. He does. And
Just a
gonna,
call.
yeah, he's going to limp in with the 4s.
Phil in there. Here's Patrick with a pretty genuine starting hand with the ace-jack.
Raise.
And we talked about Tom Dwan's position. If you're Mike Madisau
3,300.
also, you've got Patrick Antonius and Phil Ivey directly to your left. Very tough spot to be in.
Pass.
And Antonius has raised this up to a little bit over $2,000.
Pass. Pass.
And I love being in there with small pocket
Pass.
pairs because if you do hit your set, you can win a monster. But in this case, heads up, out of position against a tough player like Antonius. Are you calling?
And the other point is, he doesn't always have to have a big hand, so you haven't got that payoff value if you do catch. Of course, we have seen... Well, that's a pretty good door card
Queen
there
6-4.
for Mike Mattis.
But it's exactly what you said. Now, the flop is Queen 6-4. Exactly what you said in the sense that Antonius doesn't need a big hand here. And in this case, he only has ace high. So it might be tough for Mattis to get paid off. Now, Mattis leads right into the razor.
I do actually like that as a play. If he's up against a big pair or something like that, he may end up picking up a big pot. But he's probably cost himself 3,000-4,000 in a continuation bet. But if he's up, he's going for the throat. He's hoping to win 100,000 in that pot. But as it happens, Patrick hasn't got much to call him with.
Now, leading into somebody like Chris Ferguson, I like, because it's more likely Chris Ferguson does have a big hand. But Patrick Antonius, though, why not give him a little bit of rope and let him hang himself?
It's true, and you could possibly just call him down. We've already seen him running without the ball once today, and he may be tempted to do it again.
We're in the heart of London for the FullTiltPoker.net $1 million cash game. 7 players, $1 million at the table.
Pass.
Patrick Antonius, the one-time model, now poker pro, not going to play. Andrew Feldman, though, we haven't heard much from lately. I have a feeling we might hear something from here.
He may play the ace-king, I'm pretty sure of that. He's raised it up. The rest of the players will have noticed just how tight he's been.
Pass.
Now, do you need to mix it up a little bit more to get action?
Well, he's getting a call here from a weaker hand of Phil.
Heads up. Jack, Queen.
Oh, wow, it's an interesting flop.
Check.
3 clubs out there. Queen, Jack, 8 of clubs. Andrew Feldman with the king of clubs. Phil Ivey with the ace of clubs. Feldman ahead right now.
A little bit of a favourite for the pot as well, but if serious money goes in here, you can be sure it's because the clubs come down, and that means Phil Ivey will be in front.
Raise.
I don't think Andrew's going to lay this down. He's got 2 overcards to the board, a straight draw, and he thinks a flush draw.
Yeah, Feldman bet 3,000. Phil Ivey has raised it up to 9,000. Feldman can catch a 10 to make a straight, a club to hit the king high flush. And, of course, he might think he's ahead right now with ace-king.
Let's see how he wants to play it.
It's 6,000 back to Feldman.
I can't imagine him laying it down. He might try something creative.
Now, obviously, Andrew Feldman, a phenomenal player in his own right, but he's up against Phil Ivey.
Probably more used to playing online. It becomes a bit of a different story when you're staring down at probably the greatest player in the world, Phil Ivey.
Well, he's going to call, and we're going to see a turn. And the turn is the club. It's the action card. It's the 4 of clubs on the turn. Phil Ivey with the absolute nuts.
Well,
actually, I shouldn't say the absolute nuts. Right, 9, 10 of clubs actually would be a straight flush. Thank you for catching me right there. But either way, Ivey.
It's going to be enough for him to put the chips in. That much is certain.
But if you're Feldman, how many chips do you get put in there? Remember, you can't beat 9, 10, and you can't beat the ace.
20.
20,000.
Well, I bet he puts in at least another 20,000.
He really going on a limb on that one, huh? If you're Andrew Feldman, all you can do here is call. You're not raising.
No.
You know, if you raise, you're only getting called by a better hand.
He also knows, he makes this bet. What's it going to be on the river?
Well, he did make the call.
He may be able to pass it on the river, but I've seen Andrew play a couple of hands where he's made some calls on the river to maybe try and call someone down.
Well, the 5 of clubs on the river. Well, if somebody had 6, 7 of clubs now, that's a straight flush as well. Pot is nearly 64,000 chips. Ivey with the ace high flush. Feldman with the king high flush. Feldman made a tough call on the turn. 20,000 chip bet. $20,000 bet, I should say.
I'm all in.
All in.
Phil over betting the pot. moving all in here. Basically saying he's actually putting Andrew all in.
Phil Ivey is all in. Andrew Feldman with only 65,500. It's pretty much a pot-sized bet.
Yeah, it is.
Unbelievable. Turn of events here. Now, Feldman has to know that Ivey either has pretty much the nuts or nothing at all, right?
Exactly.
I mean, he wouldn't be value betting with a 10 or a 9 of clubs.
No. It's got to be going through his mind. It's pretty well a bluff or nothing. A bluff or an ace, the ace rather. There's always the chance he's up against 9, 10 of clubs, but...
Well, he certainly has to know that Phil Ivey is capable of a big bluff like this. The former paperboy put to the test. He's won over £4 million online. But right now, he's faced with a big decision because Phil Ivey has moved all in. Pot is 165,000.
Cool.
Oh, and he calls!
He makes the call. I've seen him make a few calls in the past. I wasn't surprised that he did it. He's got to realise the only hand he's beating there is a bluff. No one's going to be making a value bet with the 9 or 10. That's a big, big pot and a big, big blow for Andrew Feldman.
I got you covered.
And Andrew Feldman, it's his first time at the $1 Million Cash Game.
Yeah.
And it's kind of an ugly welcome to the game as he's quickly down $100,000. Well, Phil Ivey has made some of the best players in the world look like mere mortals.
Well, he's a very, very strong, tough player. And everyone seems to think he's always bluffing. I think the big pot he played against Patrick Antonius, pretty well Patrick thought that Phil was bluffing. But Andrew Feldman just done exactly the same. Thought that he'll...
At the moment where the cameras and the lights are focused on some of the biggest names in the game. Let's get straight back up to your commentators.
Well, things have gotten a little shaken up here. Phil Ivey, as usual, on top of the leaderboard. You know, some things never change. He is up over $130,000. Chris Ferguson behind him. He's up over $15,000. Our big loser so far, Patrick Antonius, down $26,000, but Andrew Feldman, well, not a very welcome to the party. He's down $100,000. Well, Andrew.
What's ever on your mind?
What's on my mind?
It was a bad call.
It was one of the worst calls I've ever seen in my life. There you go. I had to say it. I couldn't help myself.
That's why you're here. Commenting other players.
Somebody's got to entertain this table. And since I'm here with a bunch of wet noodles.
That's right. Every time you know something, you have to say it. It's in your contract.
But I knew one thing, when Phil moved in on the river, he had the ace of clubs in his hand minimum.
Because I never move in with less than that.
I called 20,000 on the turn.
I would never do it, ever.
Well, you just think he called with on the turn. 0?
Pass.
A king of clubs.
Yeah, I know, but I thought you had the ace, to be honest with you.
I played exactly like the king of clubs.
Yeah, but if you had the ace, you'd have played it the same way too.
Nah, never.
Really? I would have.
He's all going in to shove with the ace of clubs.
Mattisau very critical of Feldman's call.
No, in the flop.
Well, in fairness, Mike's pretty critical of almost everyone else's play. Rarely his own, though.
Well, it was a couple of seasons ago where he was the self-proclaimed best no-limit cash game player at the table and then proceeded to lose $200,000.
That is good news.
And Tom Dwan going to take that one down.
How could you learn when you know everything?
I know you had the ace of clubs at hand. That I knew. I'd have quit poker forever if you didn't. You could have had the
He's
9,
got
10
the
of
best
clubs.
Monday night record I've ever seen.
You thought I had the ace of club last year.
What's that? No, I thought you had a full house. I didn't think you had the ace of club.
You remember the hand?
Yeah, of course I remember the hand. You stole it from me.
Well, it's another year, same story.
But you never know. You might not get any lessons today.
Mike the Mouth Madison still talking. Phil Ivey still winning.
And then
Get a raise from Chris Ferguson.
You made the exact same plan Ellie tonight.
First position raise with a 7-8 suited. He's mixing it up.
Well, he figures everybody else is busy talking. Maybe I can just steal a pot when nobody's looking.
I can fold now.
It's also a very dangerous spot when it's Phil's button.
Well, we don't have to worry about Phil, though. We do have to worry about Tom Dwan if you're Chris Ferguson. He's called in position with the ace-queen offsuit. A vulnerable hand if you're calling it, you know, an under-the-gun raise for Chris Ferguson, isn't it?
It certainly is. That's probably why he's only flat calling a lot of players he might have re-raised with.
Well, Chris Ferguson has outflopped him. He's hit second pair. He's also got backdoor hearts. Really nothing there at all for Tom Dwan. I mean, if you're Chris Ferguson, I think it's you definitely have to do a little continuation bet here, right?
Yeah, that's definitely what I'd have thought was on the agenda.
Yeah, Ferguson a 3-1 favorite over Tom Dwan. Does Tom Dwan float one here, knowing the type of player he's up against?
He could do. Wants to see whether he's going to fire again on the turn. Hope he's up. Now he's probably hoping he's up against ace-king if he does decide to float one. I just think the range of hands Chris is likely to have in this spot. Normally, we're not looking at the 8-7. If we're looking at kind of genuine hands.
I mean, you're thinking minimum ace-king. But if Chris Ferguson does have ace-king and Tom Dwan calls one time, he can probably take it away from him on the turn.
Exactly. He might be able to take it away from him if he's sitting there with like 7s or 9s or something like that. So
I'm always in trouble.
well, he's putting the pressure back on Chris. It's going to be interesting to see how much Chris likes his hand.
Yeah, Tom Dwan has raised this one up, and the action's back to Ferguson. It's an odd... Now, Ferguson actually bet 3,000. Tom Dwan has raised it up to about 9, I want to think. Now, if Tom Dwan actually had a legitimate hand here, might he just smooth call, though? It's an odd raise.
Exactly. If he's sitting there with a 10 or an 8, he's probably likely to smooth call. It's almost like he's representing a set, because that's the kind of hand you might want to try and shovel a lot of chips in with.
I mean, if you're in Chris Ferguson's spot, are you thinking Tom Dwan here has a set, or he's on a stone-cold bluff, or some sort of draw, like a 6-7?
Maybe, but I think if you're sitting there with 6-7 and you Tom, that's probably the spot you do float it. You do flat call. You don't want to have to shove it all in there if you are up against an overpair. Anyway, let's see what Chris does.
Yeah.
Please. Really want one?
That would be very nice.
Really? You want one? There isn't one.
Well, Chris Jesus Ferguson, always so deliberate about everything he does at the poker table. And this is no exception.
It looks like he's reaching for the chips, wants to make the call. No, looks like he wants to make the re-raise. What a great play here from Chris. I think he's realised that that was a move by Tom Dwan. Good play by Chris, and he picks that one up very quickly. Nice read. And that's why he's the 2000 World Series of Poker champion.
It's a fantastic play by Chris Ferguson. I mean, I think he played it pre-flop like he had aces or kings, and he said, you know what, I'm going to continue it like I have aces or kings. I also think Tom Dwan probably would have been more successful had he just called and then tried to take it away in the turn.
I think you read it absolutely right when you said if he's got any kind of half a hand here, he's just going to flat call and see what happens on the turn when you're up against Chris in a first position. He spotted it for what it was. And
24 hours of intense poker action. And I thought for a second it might take a while to get things going, but I was wrong, because right away, Phil Ivey up $130,000. Tom Dwan first to act. Now, one thing's interesting. I know you have a lot of experience having won $100,000 or even lost $100,000, as sad as it might sound. How do you feel either way? I mean, what are these players feeling just minutes into our first action?
Well, I think if you're setting down for a session like this, you've got to be expecting to have some pretty big swings. I think Phil's probably going to be more full of confidence, obviously, picking up over $100,000 pretty early on. But Andrew Feldman knows he's here for the long haul. He knows it could end up that he ends up losing a few $100,000 in this cash game.
Well, this is interesting. Phil Ivey has raised it up with Jack 7. And Andrew Feldman's going to play his button. He's going to re-raise, and he's going to take this one away as Ivey gets out of the way. So the first round goes to Ivey, but the second round goes to Feldman.
I think the first round was almost a knockout, so I'd take that one rather than the second.
Well, there's one now.
Yeah, one up.